Welcome into Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Hello, Joel C. Cordes, my friend.
Hi, Arky Shea. This is episode 76 of BbA. And if you're listening on the Spotify, the iTunes, the Spreaker, wherever you get your podcast, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. And of course, don't forget, we have a YouTube channel. If you want to check out the video version of this show, give us a like, share, subscribe, ring the little bell over there, whatever you got to do. Search BbA and Basketball by Association. Arky Shea, this is episode 76, so we're going to name this after the most famous wearer of 76, the number 76 in NBA history.
Okay.
Would you like to take a guess as to who this gentle dude might be?
Okay, I feel like
gentle
that
man, gentle dude. There actually is a hint in that.
I was about to say, I'm not sure if that was a hint or if
there actually is a slight little hint in that.
Okay. All right. See, I feel like you're kind of baiting me with the phrase famous.
Yeah.
Most famous wearer of 76.
Yes and no. Because the clues are the gentle dude reference. There's also the fact that he was 7'6", which should narrow it down greatly, hint, hint.
Okay.
And the fact that the team that drafted him was the 76ers. So when he chose this number, there was some sly humor behind it, and that leaves you with zero excuse as a Knicks fan who resides in the same division as the Philadelphia 76ers not to get this one.
Is that the Storm and Mormon, Sean Bradley?
That is Sean Bradley, the most famous wearer of 76. And yes, for those of you keeping score at home, the only wearer of 76 in NBA history. And it's interesting in the case of Sean Bradley. I think he's most famous for those first, 3 seasons in Philadelphia, where he quickly, got the reputation as a draft bust, even though in his third season with Philly, he did average 12 points, 8 boards, and the guy was a block machine. Of course, when you're 7'6", you're going to get lots of blocks. He averaged over 3 blocks, like 6-7 times in his career, but got famous for being posterized a lot because he was big and rail thin, and people were searching for him to put a dunk on the kid. Played with the New Jersey Nets for a couple nondescript years, but here's the thing that a lot of people forget about Sean Bradley. The dude logged 9 seasons after that with the Dallas Mavericks, and I believe he has a ring. Got to look to see when Dallas got that ring with Dirk, but it may have been that he appeared in the series against Miami where they did not get a ring. He at least got to a NBA Finals. So now I got to check myself before I wreck myself on that.
There's a surprising number of guys that there are names in your head and you forget, they just get lost on rosters and play a lot longer than you sort of expected them to. Not that they were standout stars, and maybe they were for a little while, but guys that just stick around the league for a lot longer than you think, just because they'll go to a couple teams, they'll play 20, 25 games a year, 10 to 12 minutes or something like that. And you forget that they're around because they're not in the spotlight. The NBA spotlight, it stars so much that unless you're watching multiple teams religiously, you sort of lose track with a lot of these dudes.
And mea culpa on my part, he did not win an NBA championship. He got close a couple of times with those Mavericks, but I'm thinking of him a little bit later, and he was not on those the championship team with Dirk. But
that's
nonetheless a good career and my spotty memory. But anyway, this is the Sean Bradley episode. Let's get going and not pay attention to the fact that I didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, let's not pay attention to that, and let's speak about something real quick off the top before we get into previewing what we were going to preview, as we told you last week, that we were going to preview these divisions in the National Basketball Association of America in the United States.
The Southwest Division today, right? So there's the tie-in with those Dallas Mavericks. I will take credit for that.
You get all the credit, Joel C. Cordes. But as we've sort of been alluding to, it seems to have finally gotten to the place that is happening. Marc Gasol is going to be traded from Los Angeles to the Memphis Grizzlies, where the Grizzlies plan to wave the young. Well, I guess not young man. He's not old, but he's just not young in terms of NBA.
In basketball terms, yeah.
Right. And he's just going to be done with the league. And he seems like he's very okay with that right now. I mean, a very long, hard career. I should say hard. He's a grinder type player, and it looks like that we've hit the end of the road for Marc Gasol.
On the NBA side, at least, right?
Yeah.
He'll still be playing pro basketball, and he follows in the footsteps of his brother Pau, who did leave the NBA. There was injury issues with Pau. He left the NBA and then wrapped up his career overseas. And there's a lot of, I think, symbolism in him doing that, not only following what Pau did. They both played for the Grizzlies. They both played for the Lakers. Pau, of course, played for a couple other teams along the way, but Marc is going back to the team in Spain that he began his pro career with as well. So he gets to end technically with the Grizzlies, the team that brought him in, traded by the Lakers, the team that drafted him, and then gets to finish up his pro career in Spain. I think that's the way it should go. The only question, of course, is what took so long, because we all had this sense that this was coming. And it is true that he probably was weighing his options, and certainly earned the right to do that. You're right. He played on those grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies teams. He did win a championship. And this I know for actual fact. He did actually win a championship with the Toronto Raptors, in the Kawhi Leonard iteration, and got to chase one with the Los Angeles Lakers. Although I will say this about Marc, sorry. To me, last year, he looked like he was done. He looked like there wasn't tread left on the tires. And I know he was still numerically advanced, statistically effective enough while he was out there, but I didn't see a guy who had long for the NBA during the minutes that he had, and I know it was a bit of a disappointment for the Lakers. They probably should have known better, because what you saw at the tail end of the Raptors run should have been clue enough. And of course, the Lakers were just a massive disappointment last year in the grand scheme of things. But so we should have known this was coming anyway, and especially when the Lakers went out and brought in Dwight Howard, who we talked about last week. He can eat minutes for you still at this point in his career. And DeAndre Jordan, who can still give you something, even though both of those players are certainly not the all-star versions of themselves anymore. But Marc Gasol, another perennial all-star who walked through this Lakers organization during the LeBron run. And, happy trails. It was fun to watch him in the NBA for sure. I mean, very savvy defender, very savvy passer, underrated offensive player. Probably not your number 1A guy on both ends of the floor, but absolutely could anchor your defense.
Let me add one other quick story. By the way, I agree with you on all that. It felt like it was probably in last year, and sort of this year confirmed the deal, sort of so to speak. And the Lakers aren't probably the most angry in the world that this is going to be a thing, and they probably were sort of acquiescing to him just a little bit to sort of nudge him in that direction and say, all right, so we'll send you to Memphis. We can end things the right way. Let's just sort of, thank you for giving us some time, kind of thing. So, and the NBA is a league that does that a lot more than most other leagues out there, especially when you know what the end result's going to be. That, hey, let's just send you. Let's just send you home.
When you have a great player who's earned their laurels, he earned his respect. And truth be told, had he stayed on this Lakers and chased another ring, he might have got one. The Lakers are certainly a favorite, but he wasn't going to play. We talked about that last week as well. Like, Anthony Davis will eat minutes at center. There's no way Marc Gasol at this point was going to get minutes over Howard or even DeAndre Jordan. And I doubt he wanted to sit the bench when he can go back, play in Spain. And if you've got one NBA ring and your heart is kind of in two different places, because he very much is tied to the Spanish national team, and everything in his home country, really, honestly, what does one more NBA championship mean when you got it already?
Right. You're not going to go on a run and win like 7 or 8 and like start challenging, challenging Bill Russell or something all of a sudden. So, hey, by the way, did I read right that like he was making all these decisions? Like, he's in Spain right now, if I'm not mistaken. Like, so he was like, he hasn't been around other than sort of FaceTime some people to sort of make this decision. So he's been home, and it's kind of hard to make the decision to leave if you've been home for so long, and to say, you know what. Everything's there. We get it. Okay, I don't need to come back to training camp, in a handful of weeks. So, One other quick tidbit closer to your home and neck of the woods. Your Minnesota Timberwolves signed Jarrett Vanderbilt to a multi-year contract. Not a ton of money. I think he's getting like a little under $14 million. But a young man who just recently played, I think, the most minutes in games of his career, and I think had the first injury-free, relatively speaking, season that he's had since he's been in the league.
Jarrett Vanderbilt has potential. I will say that he logged a couple of seasons, just a few appearances in each with the Denver Nuggets, 2 seasons, in fact, and then came aboard with the Timberwolves at the tail end of 2019-20. So last year was his first full season, really, where he was going to get minutes and opportunities, in his first full season with the Timberwolves. And the rebounding rate is really nice. He can block shots a little bit more than people realize. He's a better defender. Offensively, massive work in progress, which I think is probably part of the reason why the Timberwolves were willing to give up on number 5 pick Jarrett Culver, who they moved to the Memphis Grizzlies, because Culver had basically the exact same problems going on and skill set. Vanderbilt's a little bit bigger, though, and fills that power forward need. He's not a stretchy guy at this point in his career, but when you have Karl Anthony Towns, who is playing away from the basket, it's okay to have a big who's camping in around the dunker spot, ideally, and looking for offensive boards. So I'm glad they returned him. I'm glad they brought back Jordan McLaughlin, who's going to be their third string point guard behind Pat Beverly and D'Angelo Russell, but is a nice insurance policy. When you're the Timberwolves, you're another one of those teams that you have trouble bringing in free agents, especially because you haven't won in a long time, and when you did, it was dysfunctional. So you keep the young guys you have, and you see what happens. And you're right, the years are right, the money is right, and you move on, and you hope that this is finally the year that they can get back into the playoffs with some sort of semblance of continuity. There's definitely plenty of young talent on that team.
All right, Joel C. Corda. I got nothing on Vanderbilt. I sort of agree with you. I think he's just.
I would be surprised if anyone did have anything on Vanderbilt, right? If you're not a Timberwolves fan,
I was thinking, I was looking up his numbers when the signing happened, and I was like, "Oh crap, that's the first time he's played significant anything last year, and he's been hurt." So the fact that this is a all right, let's build something. If you got something, show us something now. This is a chance for Minnesota to pick up something possibly good on the cheap right now. So
the kid's got a nice motor, and that goes a long way when you have a guy like Towns, who his motor and his focus, they can be tested at times. But it's a nice pairing with somebody like Malik Beasley and Anthony Edwards and Pat Beverly, who are all very high motor guys. So the Wolves, I think, are aware of that and trying to find the right mix of guys who are kind of smooth and just go with the flow, which is what Towns can be, unless he gets really frustrated and pissed and then he gets in foul trouble. And then your other guys who kind of rev at a higher engine most of the time. And you don't need all of one or all of the other. You got to have a little bit of both to really have success.
All right, Joe, let's preview the Southwest Division. Then, of course, is in the Western Conference of the basketball world. Won by your Dallas Mavericks. I only say that because if you're watching the video version, there is a very Dallas Maverick-prone and primed for prime time on this video jersey right above Joel's right shoulder. Nice product placement there. Mm-hmm. Go buy you one, I guess, league.
That is Dirk. That's Dirk. It looks like it's 4 because it's folded. It's not a Mike Finley jersey. It's not Mike Finley. I'm looking on the wrong side. It is 41. It's 41. It's Dirk.
Won by those Dallas Mavericks a season ago. Their off season hasn't seen a whole bunch of change for them. They did re-sign a Boban. They re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr., which is, I think, solid for them. But a team that won their division by 4 games a season ago. And, of course, Luka is hanging out there in the atmosphere. Hard to really argue with that kid. Let's sort of start looking at them. What do you think of the Dallas Mavericks this season? What their offseason did, I should say. And do you think this is a team still poised to be able to not only compete for, but win this division? Because they were 4 clear of Memphis last year.
Memphis will be in the mix. San Antonio will be in the mix. New Orleans could be in the mix. Dallas still is the front runner by default.
You think San Antonio will be in the mix? I'm interested. When we get to them, yes. I'm interested to hear about that.
I think they will. But if you had a headline for Dallas's offseason, it really comes down to, is it enough? Is it enough when Denver is, if not a true championship contender, like as close as you possibly can be? They need some things to break their way, but they're right there. The Clippers are really, really good. They're a real contender. The Lakers are the Lakers. They're back. I believe the Warriors are championship caliber if they're healthy. I think the Phoenix Suns, you can't discount what they did. They'll be theoretically better than last year. We'll see if that holds true. So that's like 6 teams there already who got a real nice shot at being in that mix. And Dallas is in that mix by default because Luka is that good. He's the real deal and makes everyone else around him better. So Dallas is clearly banking on the fact that Luka still has ceiling left to reach, that Kristaps Porzingis with another year, another offseason of training, and another year that, yes, there was injury issues, but by Kristaps Porzingis standards was actually relatively healthy, that he's going to be better, that the whole group, this continuity idea continues to play nice together. But man, it's a lot of assumption there when you look at the rest of these Western Conference teams. As much as I think like Dwight Powell is a helpful player and Willie Cauley-Stein has some value, Boban is like a situational pitcher that you throw in there as a middle reliever at times. He's got value too, but like, which one of those guys is a starting caliber center in the NBA? And the answer is, of course, Kristaps Porzingis. But Porzingis doesn't really play center that often and doesn't want to. So you got a weird mix up front. Tim Hardaway Jr., I love as a guy who's catching passes and making shots off of Luka Doncic. Like, it's just such a no-brainer. He's a catch and shoot guy. He can come off the dribble a little bit. But Tim Hardaway Jr. is the definition of a one-way player. Like, he is your J.R. Smith, your Jamal Crawford, your Lou Williams type of guy where you got to insulate around what he does well because of what he doesn't do well on the other end. And can Tim Hardaway Jr. truly be your third best player on a championship caliber team? I don't think JR and Jamal and Sweet Lou and those guys like were ever really technically the third best player on a championship team, right?
Right.
Like JR got his ring.
Right.
And so to me, those are icing on the cake guys. They come in, and if they're able to drop 30 on any given night, you are probably smoking the other team out of the building. But if you are relying on that guy to get you 25, 20 a night and hold his guy to less than that, you're probably asking too much, and you're probably a team that, wins 55% of your games, 60% of your games, which is kind of right where the Dallas Mavericks have been.
Yeah, and I want to be fair to Dallas, because Dallas isn't a super exciting team to watch a lot of times. I mean, we could just go back to what we most recently remember, which is that series against the Clippers. I mean, it was great basketball to watch as far as entertainment, but like, how good is this team going deep into playoffs? Like,
I think they're super exciting just because Luka's there, right? He gets everybody exciting plays. Or for himself,
for sure, for sure. Like I could count on one hand the number of guys I would probably want to watch right now in a single game more than him. Mm-hmm. But that's it. I mean, the list is a very small list of guys, just watchability to sort of get you excited. But that's a team that's also right just above 500 inside its own division last season. It's a team that struggled defensively a lot last season. It's a team that, like you said, like, it has a lot of pieces, but there's not a lot of heft, right? There's not a lot of core there to sort of make you think that, like, and again, this is a team that was a 5 seed thanks to basically winning the division in tiebreakers, right? Like, they could have very easily been matching up in the well, they wouldn't have been they would have been the play-in tournament. Like, they very well could have been in that play-in tournament had Memphis been a little stronger a few weeks before.
And Dallas, who we think of as a really good high-scoring team because of, Luka's there, and that must mean, and we know all of what he does and how many points they get off of his assists or his hockey assists and all that stuff. But keep in mind the Dallas Mavericks had the 17th ranked offense in points last year. So just barely on that bottom half. This is why I say, like, can Timmy Hardaway be your third best player and Dwight Powell as your quote unquote starting center, a guy who actually gets you like 6-7 points a game typically? You know, you got Dorian Finney-Smith in the starting lineup, who again is just a grinder. He's a real worker. He provides value, but that's another guy who typically, like, if he gets you over 10 points in a game, it was a good game for Dorian Finney-Smith. It is who he is.
Yeah, so we're not talking about a team that, even though they won their division and were four clear of Memphis, and they were just out. Well, they were 5 games out, in the tiebreakers of possibly being. Well, they were 5 games out in a possible tiebreaker of even sniffing a home playoff a series to start the 2021 playoffs. So I'm very much with you. I don't know if they're demonstrably better. In fact, I tend to lean against that they're demonstrably better going into this season.
And remember, they don't have Rick Carlisle anymore. We forgot to mention that. Like,
well, that was going to be my next step, which is, and you basically forced the way out of Rick Carlisle. And I'm not going to say there's necessarily an upgrade there, because Rick Carlisle's a pretty darn good coach. So this season does set up for that division, for there to find themselves a new champion coming into it, because I don't know if Dallas, unless Luka sprung wings, you know, to be that much better of a team, unless you just throw the ball up to Luka, and while he hovers above the entire crowd and arena, just throwing dunks that way, maybe. Like, it's a fine team. It's a pretty good team, but it's not a Western Conference champion team. It's not Western Conference Finals even team. I think if they got to the semis, that'd probably be very best case scenario for this team.
They're one of those teams that, yes, theoretically could win just about any first round series, but that's including playing spoiler against somebody really good if they got hot. But that's kind of where they top out at, right? They don't seem to have that sustainability to pull that off for multiple series in a row, unless, again, Luka truly has a ceiling that he's going to get anywhere close to this year that is so much higher than we've even thought about. And again, I don't think any of us really in the back of our minds put that past him. Like, it does seem theoretically possible, but I mean, then we're talking like LeBron James, like prime level LeBron, putting the team on your back sort of thing happening here. And as good as Luka is, there's still a ways to go before you're quite at that level, right?
Yeah, I listen. I play 2K, and Kristaps has just won his 4th straight MVP for the Knicks, and we've gotten to the NBA Finals 3 of the 4 years that we've sort of been playing there. I play whenever my baby gets to sleep. It's a very slow, tedious process. I've been so disappointed by what Kristaps has sort of been. Now, injuries have sort of hampered a lot of that, but I thought I was going to get as close to punching James Dolan in the face when I saw that that Kristaps was getting booted from New York, and to sort of see that it hasn't really sort of a match for him in Dallas is not completely surprising. It's a little disappointing, though. I will say it's a little disappointing for what I've seen that guy flash out there sometimes.
I will say this in his defense, because that what you just said is the narrative around his last 2 seasons in Dallas. And it's not necessarily incorrect. At the same time, the dude averaged 20 points a game last year, got 9 boards, little low on the block category with just over 1 per game. And I think that's where there's that question mark of, is he just a spot up shooter for Luka? The fact that when he gets into the lane, there's so much space taken up with Kristaps. Does that take away what Luka does best? Are they really that best pairing for each other? On paper, it looked like they could, because, you know, Porzingis can shoot the 3. He can be stretchy. He is mobile enough to get into the lane and finish a play. He doesn't look gimpy at this point. he just doesn't look as explosive as he did, you know, in the first season and a half with the Knicks. And that question then comes down to, like, is he ever going to have that? You know, his player efficiency rating was 21. So you still, you take that potential. Like, Dallas didn't give up a ton to get Porzingis. And to me, you let this ride one more year. You don't trade him at the deadline or anything like that. You don't mess with his confidence. You give this one more season to see if he can truly be that second wheel. And you go from there at that point.
You know, I understand, but like I feel like that 20-point per game thing with Kristaps, like I think it's a different NBA, right? Like 20 is not nothing, but like I feel like and I'd have to go back to do the research, but it feels like 20 is so much more attainable for guys that, like, there's probably 30, 35 dudes that scored 20 a game last year. So, you know, like I'm not saying it's nothing, and I'm not trying to dismiss what he has been able to do, but like the potential energy in him, right, was massive to where he could have been, and maybe some of the energy gets sucked up by a Luka being alongside him, right? Like maybe it's just the way those two go together, that this 20, 21, 22 points a game that he'll be able to get will be fine, but Luka's going to dominate the headlines. He's probably going to get 5, 6, 7 more every single game, just on average, and you know, that's just how it's going to be, and the narrative is going to look at Kristaps being sort of a really good player, but never sort of what the greatness that we thought he may be coming into in New York and then going up to Dallas. So next up in the division is the Memphis basketball Grizzlies. Joel C. Cordes. Joel, just talk to me about the Grizz, because you think that they're going to be in the hunt again this year. I also agree that they're going to be in the hunt again, because I don't love Dallas, as we've established so far, nearly as much as we probably should, just from storylines and from Luka star power. But what do we think about the Grindhouse in Memphis this season, as their chance to not only get into the playoffs proper and maybe dominate? That's right, dominate the West.
Here is my bold prediction out of this division. I think the Grizzlies have a greater chance of winning the Southwest Division than the Dallas Mavericks do. Memphis is a more complete team. Ja Morant is not the player that Luka Doncic is, but he is such a great young point guard and such a good, almost Derrick Rose, John Wall, Russell Westbrook type of motor for this young team, and the rest of the guys feed off that. And then they're just loaded with mean and nasty wings who just get after it. You know, Dylan Brooks, D'Anthony Melton, Kyle Anderson, of course, is like, he's a running joke because of how slow he plays, but the dude just makes plays. You know, they're going to take a look at Jarrett Culver, who they got from Minnesota. They swap out Jonas Valanciunas, who had a really solid run with the Grizzlies. Last year was a great anchor for them and a manufacturer of points inside. But the fact that he had to operate inside so much, and you have to run plays for him, maybe didn't fit Memphis' style at times. That's why they swap him out for Steven Adams, who, again, you talk about gritty, punch you in the face type of players. That's Steven Adams. And Adams is a guy that is a good passer like Valanciunas is, but you don't run plays for Adams. Adams sets screens for people. He plays out of that dunker spot. He gets garbage baskets. He's just there. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is back and should be healthy. That's the guy they will run plays for. Brandon Clark coming off the bench. You know, they got nice minutes out of Xavier Tillman last year. So you just look at this Grizzlies team, and they're very quietly 10, 11 deep with not only credible NBA players, but guys who just fit the mold of what they're trying to do. And one of the things that I love about this Grizzlies team is, again, the misnomer that, like, oh, it's Grindhouse, so they don't score many points. You know, like, Memphis was 15th in the league in offense. They were fine. You know, we talk about Dallas being like 17th. That's not fine, because Dallas is their identity was tied around being like scorers because their
Right.
defense sure wasn't good,
But
right?
that's what you mentioned with the narrative, right? Like you talk about like this Memphis team, points per game wise, was better than Dallas. Would you have guessed that?
No,
No,
and
no.
we're talking 1 point per game, but
But no one
nonetheless,
talk. But you just sort of
yeah.
would think which team. Oh, clearly it's Dallas has been scoring like 140 points a game. No, but Memphis is one of those, and I liken it to Nashville and the Titans with football. Like Memphis just gets forgotten in so many people's eyes for how good they are, how gritty they are, but also
And they're young, which means across the board, theoretically, they can be that much better this year, right? There's upside that Dallas, who's a little older, doesn't have unless you're talking about its 2 stars.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to with you, Joel, about Memphis is that last year, if you essentially just look at the majority of their major stats, right, they're in the middle of the pack in everything. And I mean, like, and not to be that that's a bad thing, right? Like, middle of the pack is better than the lower end of the pack, right? But like, even when it comes to like playing in your division, I think they were 500. Like on the road, I think they're a little above 500, but at home they were 500. And regular season record, they were just above 500. Offensively, they're in the middle of the pack, right? Like there's not a lot that just sort of stands out to you and says this team has an identity one way or the other that we believe can make it that much better and sort of jump into everyone's psyche. Maybe it doesn't have to just jump into ours since we're talking about them. But I think that the thing that sort of lends itself to liking them is that these are, as you said, they're a bunch of babies, right? They are there's a lot of youth on this team that we have been predisposed to just think that another year, 10 more games into a season, not having to deal with COVID nearly as much now that we started to get away from some of those protocols nearly as much, getting fans back into the stands, that we may be seeing the beginning of a pretty decent stretch of like really good playoff basketball Memphis Grizzlies team. It's just we're on the very beginning edge of it, is what I would think.
And for a young team, their identity was on the defensive end. They had the 7th best defensive rating in the league. You know, you talk about the teams that were ahead of them, the Lakers, Sixers, Jazz, Knicks, Warriors, Suns, all pretty good playoff teams, right? Couple of contenders in there as well. You know, and Memphis right behind them. In fact, Memphis finished with a better defensive rating than the Clippers, the Bucks, the Heat, and the Nuggets. So there were a lot of games where the Grizzlies were playing teams that on paper, or at least in the national narrative, were just supposed to be flat out better than them. And Memphis took those games, you know, and they strangled those games, but it's not the bottom 10 offense sort of identity that we saw with the original grit and grind Grizzlies, because Ja Morant is that dynamic. Those old Grizzlies did not have a player like Ja Morant, and that's no disrespect to like Zach Randolph, who could get you 20 points a game, but he was going to manufacture 20 points a game for you, right? It was different.
Yeah. The Ja Morant is just such an explosive playmaker type guy, and such like an energy, sort of like
exactly.
Like he is like the core of that team, and everyone feeds off of Ja Morant, and it's nice, right? Like we talked about last week with Colin Sexton and crew with the Cavs still having like a Kevin Love sort of being the lumbering old guy that sort of I think kind of doesn't really want to be there, but isn't going to kind of force his way out as for a fear of losing some of the money that he's probably going to get on his contract for a quote unquote buyout. This is not that team. Like, this is a team that is very much into its locker room, very much into its star, and very much into building upon that. And I think that there is a good shot that this team is pretty good this year, and maybe next year, maybe. Well, a whole lot has to happen with offseason moves and all, but this team has a chance to be semifinals, conference semifinals, finals worthy coming up over the next 4 or 5 years or so. Because
Absolutely.
I think they're building into themselves pretty nicely. And I think that the way they play, and I'm guessing they'll be even better offensively this season. I think that's only setting up for good things for Memphis.
The only concerns really are the health of the two stars, which is true with most teams, but Jaren Jackson, has had injury issues the last few seasons and nagging issues. And when you've got a young point guard like Ja Morant who plays off that explosiveness, who gets to the rim as often as he does, who puts that much torque on his legs, there always is. And again, Derrick Rose is the cautionary tale of that. There's always those concerns about how sustainable is that. John Wall ran into the injury issues. Russell Westbrook had injury issues, but seems to have retained a lot of that explosiveness even as he's aged. But there's a lot of young point guards throughout NBA history who kind of played this way, and it caught up with them eventually. Now, Ja Morant's a young guy, and so it would have to be a freak sort of thing going on. But when you look at the Grizzlies roster, you go, they're so good at playing defense. There are guys, especially like Dylan Brooks and DeAnthony Melton, who can put up points. But you take Ja Morant out of that picture, or if they lose Jaren Jackson again, especially when you don't have Valanciunas to get you 20 points because Steven Adams is not that guy, that's where things could go south for them real quick. And all of a sudden they're dropping to like a bottom 7, bottom 5 offensive team who, they play good defense and they'll win some games, but it's going to get ugly if they don't have their two motors.
Let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs, because I'm going to lay out and let you talk about this one, because I'm very interested to hear what your thoughts on a lot of roster upheaval this offseason, including one very good player in Josh Primo that they drafted that I'm really excited about, and how especially he'll work with the Spurs and Greg Popovich. But this team has a bunch of new faces that'll be in for it this year, and I'm guessing that's going to be an interesting and key reason why you think this team is going to be in the hunt this year for the division.
No DeMar DeRozan anymore. LaMarcus Aldridge was obviously gone last year, so the keys have been turned over to the young guys now. Dejounte Murray is very close to an all-NBA defender. They bring back Bryn Forbes, who had an okay run with the Bucks. And
had one very magical moment in the
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then kind of fell off the face of the earth from there. But I've loved this Spurs backcourt going back a couple of years. When you look at Murray, Forbes, Derek White, and Lonnie Walker, and now you talk about Josh Primo added into that. Trey Jones, I think he may not stick with the Spurs, but I think like his brother Tyus is going to be a long-standing backup point guard in the NBA. Devin Vassell, who's playing the wing for them, is another young guy. So they're loaded with all of these young guards, and it definitely is rebuilding. It's teaching time, but the talent is there. The question with the Spurs has been, are any of those guys a superstar beyond Murray being a defensive superstar? Can he be more than that on the offensive end? Up front, Keldon Johnson looks like a very good NBA scorer. I see a lot of Thad Young in Keldon Johnson, like young Thad Young. And it's really interesting that the Spurs brought in, of all people, Thad Young this off season. So maybe they see that too and are wanting to, get Young, who's one of the NBA's good guys, trying to get him as a mentor for Keldon Johnson and to teach him a few of the ropes of playing that undersized but kind of explosive power forward position. Very quietly, the Spurs brought in Doug McDermott. So they've got some three-point shooting chops here when you think about Forbes, Vassell by reputation at least, and Doug McDermott. Those are three like very, very high-end snipers to try to then go with the fact that like Murray and White will kind of slash to the basket. Up front, I don't love what the Spurs have. Jakob Poeltl is fine, but it's kind of that same question that I had with the Mavericks. Like, is he really a starting NBA center? On some nights, sure. He doesn't really hurt you. But where is the star? And I think that's what San Antonio is trying to figure out this year. Do they have that guy who is a perennial all-star on this group? We know that the group can play together. We know that there's talent. We know that they've got a lot of guys who will be starting caliber players probably for the rest of their career. But for San Antonio to bypass Memphis or even Dallas, they're going to have to unearth something that they didn't have before. The money is on Murray. It was there before he got hurt, but offensively, he's been a little more raw than people I think expected.
Yes, so there were 9 games out of the division, and 9 games out of being in the potential playoff. The play-in of the playoffs last season. I think that they are better. Like I do really think that what they've done this offseason does make them better. I think Greg Popovich went to work and got a gold medal and a better basketball team back in the association. I don't know how much better, right? Like I think a handful of games is probably what I feel like I should expect. And this team's probably about a 500 team if we got to play a full 82 last year, right? They're probably a 41-41 team. Are they much better than that?
No, I think they're like a 47 win team.
You
they're
think
about
they are?
47? Yeah.
Because what they win, 33 last year?
Yeah,
34?
I think that's where they top out, but I think 47, 48 games is possible, and to be in that realm.
But that's pretty good. 47, 48 games. Like that gets you like top 3, top 4 in the conference. You think they're that good?
No. We're talking 47 wins 47. In an 82 game season, not in the 72.
Then let me projectulate a little bit. That's right. That's my word. If I projectulate a little bit, that still gets you pretty close to contending for a home playoff spot.
Maybe ish, but to me, the top, especially in the West in the last few years, the top 4 seeds are always 50 plus.
Right. Okay.
And your top seed is pushing 60 plus. You may even have 2 teams that have.
Okay. We can say the top two or 3 are going to win 60, 58, 62 games or something like that, right? But let's just look like for example, the 3-4 seed were 47 wins. So if we give them another 10 games, do they go 500? That would give them at 52-ish, maybe 54 if they play a little bit better than that. But 48, like Dallas, Portland, and LA all won 42 games last year, and those teams were battling for that 5th spot, and they were still 4 or 5 games off of the 4th spot. If they're in that neighborhood, I mean, we're talking probably somewhere around the 6th seed, worst case. I would think,
but that's their absolute ceiling to me, right?
Okay, all right, but I just find it interesting that you think that they're capable of probably getting to a safely in the playoffs, no play-in necessary, if they play up to their complete potential, and maybe a couple things fall their way.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised, like, if things go south real quickly for the Mavericks, like if Jason Kidd implodes there.
Which is not impossible.
If they didn't do enough, and of course you get major injuries ahead of you and that sort of thing. If Memphis isn't ready to take those next steps, although I think Memphis is just like built to be ready, they're going to be built to be in the same like 47, 48 win type of neighborhood that the Spurs are. It's just you look at the Grizzlies and you feel more comfortable that they can do it right now, whereas the Spurs, it's like, we got to see some of these young guys really step out. But yeah, I don't have any hesitation saying that about the Spurs. They're well coached. They're well balanced for the most part. Yes, they're a little bit shallow at the very top end when you talk about star power talent, but star power talent usually is what gets you playoff series wins. You can get to the playoffs without top tier superstar players. You can do it. And the Spurs are built to be maybe one of those teams that's in. But okay, if San Antonio gets in as a 6 seed, I don't give them the same shot of winning a first round playoff series like I would Dallas or Memphis. Absolutely not.
To the Pelicans we go. New Orleans is next on our list. New Orleans has been perennially, I feel like, for the guy that's on top of that franchise as far as being the star player, at least from the standpoint of the entire league, even though they force-fed him into the playoffs last year. Not this last year, but the year before in the bubble. The Pelicans have been disappointing. Like, for what the league has been hoping to get out of New Orleans, they have been very disappointing. They're parting ways with coaches very amicably in the offseason. They're just trying to get some kind of positive momentum around Zion Williamson, and it's very clear that they have done a handful of offseason things that are nice. They've gotten rid of a little pejorative when I say that. They have moved on from Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe and Lonzo Ball, and now they got Valanciunas, Adoransky, Garrett Temple. I think I'm missing another trade that they made, but regardless, I think they got Herb Jones in the draft from Alabama. I really like that guy, the SEC Player of the Year. Joel, can I have optimism that the Pelicans can be contending for a play-in spot this year?
You get a full season of health out of Zion and Brandon Ingram together? Yes, absolutely, because you talk about top-end superstar talent, and that's what the Pelicans have that the Grizzlies and the Spurs do not.
That's
Although
true.
with the Grizzlies, you got Ja, so you at least have one. And with the Mavericks, you got one in Luka. New Orleans has two. They're just a little bit young yet. And for all the physical talent, there still is that learning to harness all of it in a very consistent winning time sort of way. I don't understand why New Orleans would move on from Lonzo Ball. That's a guy that fit their timeline, whose playing style as a distributor, and a guy who rebounded well, was not terrible defensively, has turned into a not terrible three-point shooter, like just fit. It just made sense. And instead you bring in Devontae Graham, who had flashes.
Devontae Graham, that's what I was missing.
With the Charlotte Hornets, but Devontae Graham is like more of a gunner. And I know you're a big Kira Lewis guy. Like he showed flashes with New Orleans last year. He won some trust from Stan Van Gundy, but it was just flashes.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of point guard is Lewis? We don't know what his NBA role actually is beyond just energetic, fast guy that you bring in. And again, those
are awesome. Those are fun to watch.
Absolutely. And you've got a new coach there again. So you're talking about the stability issues and whether the same thing that we saw happen to Chris Paul back in the day, the same thing that we saw happen to Anthony Davis back in the day with the New Orleans Hornets, and then the Pelicans, like, is that going to come home to roost again, where you've got a singular generational talent? And yes, you're shuffling the deck and you're being active, trying to find the right mix, but you just keep shuffling. And after a while, that becomes a huge problem. Like, you hope that doesn't happen. I liked Steven Adams next to Zion Williamson better than I like Valanciunas. Valanciunas is the better player. But again, Valanciunas is best when he's operating out of the low block, off of the elbow. He's got the ball in his hands a fair amount of time. He's a guy who can manufacture points for you. He is a decent passer. He can be an aggressive rebounder. He's a nice player. But why do you want Valanciunas when the ball should be in Zion and Brandon Ingram's hands that much all the time? And if it's not, you just brought in Devontae Graham to chuck some shots for you. Like, that's the part that doesn't make sense, because Adams is the better defender. Adams is the guy who is setting screens for you. And maybe the fact that Valanciunas, who is a good screen setter, can actually finish a play, maybe that's what they looked at and said, all right, he's a little more versatile than Adams, and so we can play pick and pop with him. We can play pick and roll with him a little bit more. But I don't get it. And that's what a lot of people have been saying about this Pelicans offseason is, why? What was the reason behind these moves? You've got young guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Josh Hart, who I like both of them as wings. Jackson Hayes has a little bit of promise. So there's other youngsters that like can meld into something really nice here around Zion and Ingram, and they're only going to go as far as those two superstars, but it just feels like the pieces they had last year actually made more sense. But then again, New Orleans did miss the playoffs last year and they did fire their coach. So maybe there's stuff that we don't know about, in the relationship of the players or the work ethic or something where they said the mix is off and we got to reshuffle.
Yeah, I think your latter comment there is pretty spot on. I think there's something we're not seeing completely that's sort of been, at the very least, a big anchor to this team and the momentum that it could have possibly had last season, and maybe that's sort of been adjusted. Clearly, Stan Van Gundy wasn't the happiest being there, and who knows how early that happened into the season for him. Finally, the Houston Rockets in the division. I don't have to tell you, they weren't great last season. In fact, they were, I would dare say, bad. Is that a fair thing to say about them? Very, very, very bad last year. Only 17 wins, but they probably could have gotten like 19 if it was an 82-game season. So, it's not all bad for the Rockets. For them, I think they had 4 picks in the top 24 this last year's draft. So they got a lot of kids that are coming in young and hot for them, right? So I'll be excited to, I don't know. Actually, excited may not be the right word. I'm interested to see what the Rockets will be able to put. Joel, their off season's basically been in drafting and seeing what those kids can sort of do in workouts and such, including I think they got the number 2 overall pick. They had Jalen Green is with the Rockets now. So, give me something optimistic for the Rockets. I think it's fair to say we don't think they're going to win the division, but can they get to 20 plus wins next season?
Yes. I think overall they'll probably be a mess, but they could be a very beautiful mess because of the talent that actually is there. Now, last year it was a revolving door of them cycling out the last of their veterans from the James Harden era. Young guys who were just clearly not ready to play yet, or if they were there, they had a really nice game, but then one of the other young guys was hurt, and Houston was clearly tanking down the end of the season. Especially, Christian Wood got hurt fairly early. That put a damper on things. But let's take a look at the roster here for just a minute.
Oh boy,
you got Kevin Porter Jr.
Okay.
Who's giving off like major old school J.R. Rider vibes in all the good and bad and very disturbing ways. Like, he has not been able to steer clear of trouble, but the kid clearly has talent. And he's very much one of those guys that it's like, if the light bulb can go on and he can look at some of those cautionary tales and realize that like talent does not overcome stupidity in the NBA. If you can put your head on straight, like, he could be very, very good. The dude was dropping 20-point games like candy at the end of the season. You talked about Jalen Green. That's another guy who very much can fit with what they're trying to do, has some superstar potential. Christian Wood, not only at the tail end in Detroit, but even when he got to Houston before he got hurt, looks like a fairly legit 20-10 type of player. Can he do that on a good team? Can he be an anchor and a winning player? We don't know yet. The pedigree wasn't necessarily there at his previous stops, but stranger things have happened in the NBA. Jayshawn Tate was a walking double-double in low points but high rebounds for a lot of last year as a undersized 4 who's very mobile. John Wall proved that there's something left in the tank. Yes, his talent does not line up with his paycheck yet, but that's not his fault. Age and injuries have caught up, but he still can probably be a starting level point guard. Eric Gordon still can hit shots. That's a veteran that you like to have on a young team like this. They bring in Daniel Tice, who clearly was just chasing the money by leaving Boston, but is another like gritty, hardworking, kind of tough-nosed type of veteran that, again, you want around the young kids, who's going to challenge them in practice, and it's going to give you good minutes when he's in. I don't understand on a young team, however, why you would bring in somebody like DJ Augustine. You've already got a veteran point guard in John Wall. You don't need to bring in another. You don't need another mentor type of guy. So that was the only move this offseason where I was really scratching my head. Because typically a lot of these rebuilding teams have seen, you want like one established veteran at each of the 3 main spots. You want a guard, you want a wing, you want a big. And the rest can be your young kids, but you at least need the old head who's there and willing to teach them. Unless Houston knows that John Wall is not going to finish the season with the Rockets. And so Augustine might be the guy who's going to be, kind of the assistant coach on the floor there for the rest of the season. Or sometimes teams like this will bring in a veteran because they know that Augustine will be needed by some playoff team down the stretch. And so as you get closer to the deadline, Houston knows they'll get a second round pick out of it. You might as well spend the money, bring the guy in, and get something for that slot. I don't know. But otherwise, like, they're young. Yeah, they absolutely could be a team that only wins 15 games, but they could be a team that surprises and wins 32 games too. Like, and all of a sudden is kind of fun to watch and has a couple of guys who, you know, are pushing for the dunk contest, or, you know, maybe a guy who's at least in the all-star conversation if they're dropping a 20-point games all the time. Like, it may not be, I don't think it'll be as ugly this year in Houston as it was last year.
I like the optimism, you know. I like that you're seeing the good things that could be within the helm of this basketball team. And this team covered, you know, a lot of games at the end of last year that you didn't think they would, right? That they did show that they're professionals, that they sort of took it seriously. They just weren't very good a lot of the time, right? They gave up a ton of points, but like you sort of alluded to, and throughout your descriptions, they can also score too. So like this is the numbers look bad, but I don't feel like they are as bad a team as the win-loss record looked like. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And again, that was the revolving, chaotic nature of their season. There should be a little more stability there this year. And again, yeah, I'm typically an off-season optimist because it's fun to try to, you know, figure out what the front offices were thinking. And usually there's some sort of logical plan for most teams. So yeah, I mean, but the flip side of what I said, like, reality could be that they're a 15-20 win team who has some talent, but is just a walking mess. Like, that's equally possible.
All right. So we're at the end of this program. It's time for you to pick the division. Since you began last week, I will start with this week. So I'm going to go with the Mavericks to repeat, but I think it's going to be a 3-team race, and I think it's going to be super close all season. I think the number 2 team on that list is going to be Memphis. Then it's going to be New Orleans, then San Antonio, then Houston.
I'll take Memphis first. I'm going to take San Antonio second, Dallas third, New Orleans fourth, Houston fifth.
How close do you think San Antonio is as number 2?
A ways away. I see.
I'm sorry. I mean, in the division itself.
Yeah. No, even behind where Memphis would be, I think you're looking at that 2, 3, 4 as very interchangeable. Maybe only like a game and a half separating those 3 teams, kind of like a photo finish. And I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of those teams made it into the play-in tournament from the division. So when I put them in that order, there's a lot of leeway in what I think.
I do think there are 3 contenders in this division like you that could be playing postseason basketball. I agree. Okay, Joel, next week we're going to be talking about the sweet, sweet Pacific Division. That's right. A lot of sexiness there. Joel's very high on at least one of these teams. He's already alluded to it there. Are you hearing us, Splash Brothers? But until then, Joel, tell people where they can find us on the old interwebs.
Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just look us up. Give us a like, share, subscribe. Tell a friend about it. We really appreciate you and all of our listeners. And this has been episode 76. Thanks, Sean Bradley.
Never forgotten, because you are the Stormin' Mormon.